Andrew Winston is author of The Big Pivot, Radically Practical Strategies for a Hotter, Scarcer, and More Open World, and is a globally recognized expert on megatrends and how to build resilient, profitable companies by helping people and planet thrive. He also lives in Fairfield, Connecticut with his family. So welcome, Andrew. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Andrew Winston. We're excited to welcome you here today. Thank you for participating in the Connecticut Climate Action Business Summit.
Glad to be here. I am a Connecticutan.
Yes, you are. So, Andrew, you're well known for your ability to identify megatrends that are important to business in terms of how to operate their companies, as well as for helping them connect the dots between issues that they're facing today to the impacts of climate change. What are some of the megatrends that were already putting pressure on business before the pandemic hit?
Well, I mean, all the ones that were putting pressure on business are still there and frankly have gotten more intense, partly just because they were already moving and partly because COVID did accelerate some of these trends. So, I mean, first and foremost, the kind of two mega or giga trends, I sometimes call them because they affect billions of people or billions of dollars. The two big ones really are climate change and inequality. And frankly, I didn't speak or look at inequality that much for most of the 20 years I've been in sustainability, but it's really risen in my consciousness, and I think everybody's, and the numbers are stark, on what's happened in particular in the last 20, 30 years and all the wealth going to the richest. And we've seen in the COVID crisis how bad it is, the split in this country from the people at the top who have recovered pretty well, and they're kind of having a recovery on top of what's basically a depression in the lower half of the income. So, and on top of that, we have the changing climate, and you've seen the fires in California. It's getting more intense. We have limited time. And then there's other things, there's the trend in kind of resource constraints, just the pressure on natural resources. We continue to use more stuff. We're a bigger and bigger population. We're getting to 8 billion soon. And the world generally gets wealthier, so we're using more stuff, and it's not as easy anymore. And so this is why you hear so much about, circular economies. The good news, those are all kind of depressing, but the good news is that the clean economy is moving very, very fast. And that's part of what I think will save us or help us get where we need to go. And then, there's kind of more social changes, the generational shifts in what younger people expect from companies they work for and buy from. Millennials, who aren't as young anymore, they're hitting 40 soon, and Gen Z now, they just have different attitudes. It's been studied many times. They have a different attitude about the role of business, and they demand kind of the kind of last megatrend, which is transparency. They expect to know everything about what's in every product, what every company does in their life. It's just supposed to be open, and they've all gotten more intense. And it means that companies are now being asked to think very hard about their role in society. And the George Floyd murder and Black Lives Matter has just raised that even more, where companies feel the need to say something about what they believe, what they stand for. And that, that's broader in a way than even sustainability. It's just, what is the purpose of this company? What's the purpose of, everyone in it? What are they doing there? So these are big changes in business, and they're accelerating.
Sustainability experts and those working in the field of climate change, we talk a lot about connectivity, and we understand that we're all part of one unified system inhabiting the planet. What are some of the parallels that you see between, the pandemic and the climate crisis, and how are they connected?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you said we all understand we're all connected. I wish we all did, because that's kind of the fundamental truth that, look, the big aha for me, and probably for everyone who's, on this meeting, on this call, who's gotten into sustainability, I think the big aha when you get into sustainability is everything's all connected, and we have to deal with kind of the things that are underpinning our society, and it's not a kind of a side issue, it's just whether we can thrive. And I think the pandemic has really demonstrated, if you didn't get before that we're all connected, I think it has raised awareness of this, in part because we quite literally share one big immune system, and we're seeing this, that we're connected by the same illness. But the parallels to the climate challenge are, pretty intense, frankly. Many have said this, but the COVID crisis is really just a fast-moving version of the climate issue, even really fast. There are changes that were happening in days that are months and years in climate. And the two, really big things that I think are similar is that these things move in a non-linear way, in kind of an exponential way. And I think we'll come back to that in a little bit. but that there's discontinuous change, right? Climate change is not linear. 2 degrees is not a little bit worse than 1.5 degrees. It's a lot worse. And it was moving exponentially in terms of emissions for many years, and we didn't respond. And the same thing with COVID. Early on, it was moving exponentially, even when there were very few cases, but the numbers were very clear, and the curves are almost look like perfect mathematical curves. That's how these things spread. So I think that's been one incredible parallel. And then unfortunately, there's kind of a twofold politicization of the issue, and the fact that there's a pushback on science, which is, I mean, this is a particularly American problem. We don't see it as much around the world, but that you have people doubting the experts for climate for many years, and now doubting Dr. Fauci, doubting, people that I can't imagine why you would doubt. And this kind of anti-science, anti-expert thing that's led to people deciding masks are somehow overbearing government overreach rather than just common sense, health protection. So this split on what's really happening in fact and science is really pretty dangerous in both cases.
So given that these are such incredible systematic issues that we're facing, and really, like you said, COVID has illuminated a lot of those issues, and in a way that was rapid, where climate change is a more gradual. What's the role that business can take in actually addressing some of the more systemic challenges?
Yeah, well, look, by the word system, it means everybody. It means everything. We've kind of gotten into this maybe false divide, again, kind of politically or philosophically, about government can handle it or business can handle it. And there's no one who can handle it. I mean, the idea that the scale of challenges we're dealing with, the inequality, the climate, resource, water, the idea that any one big sector could do it alone is pretty naive, right? I think there's kind of the more activist side, the kind of anti-business community that does want, I believe in government. I believe we need government very badly, but it's ridiculous to think they could do it alone. I mean, just from the sense of the scale of business and how much of the global kind of movement of capital and resources, it's business. And so we need business to transform. And then vice versa, the idea we privatize everything or business will just lead is also kind of naive. So I think part of the answer is that business needs to really embrace really deep and very broad collaboration and partnerships in ways that we really haven't very much before, and working very aggressively but in a kind of much more connected way with governments as well, not lobbying, not walking in and saying, how do we get my taxes lower, or kind of some antagonistic relationship. It's sitting down with them, with NGOs, with civil society, with peers, and working together on what are the right policies, what can business do. And that's how you work on a system. It's really complicated. It's not easy. It takes time. Every good example of real systems change in a sector, there's not many, has taken time, like years. So I think it's about being open to really transformative partnerships. That's the core of what business can do. And then use its leverage, right? Use the access to capital and resources that it has, and use its political influence for good. Again, not just for lobbying, but to kind of press the issue.
Along those lines, in a podcast that you did by MIT Sloan, you suggested that companies need to stop being afraid and act boldly to push for more aggressive policies. Do you think that companies are getting closer to being ready to take bolder action, or will they continue to protect short-term shareholder interests and potentially hedge their bets against the impacts and risks of climate change?
Yeah, it's a really hard question. I mean, I guess we all hope in sustainability that companies are moving away from the short-term shareholder obsession that, it wasn't all bad. I mean, the modern economy, over the last 50 years of focusing really on growth has brought 1 billion people out of poverty. I mean, that's a good thing, right? The scale of the economy, but we kind of, lost something pretty profound and have damaged the underpinnings of our society in the way we did it, right? We've overused resources, overused the climate, we've overused people, treating them as, property. And so I think we need a pretty deep conversation in business about the form of business, its role in society, and where it puts shareholders on the list of stakeholders. And in reality, it's a fairly modern thing in the last 40, 50 years to say shareholders are the only thing that matter. It's the Milton Friedman, idea that came out 50 years ago, and it's really taken over. But it's not really the way most companies got started. They had a purpose, they had a reason, a customer they wanted to solve a problem for. So it's not crazy to say like shareholders are not the only stakeholder, but it's a pretty big switch to flip these days to say shareholders really should come last. And that doesn't mean you sacrifice profits. I think you can do even better, but they'll get paid because you're doing right by everybody else. So I think the number of companies understanding that is growing. If you step back and look at the progress on sustainability and climate and, taking these issues seriously, on some level, we won, right? Every large company has a sustainability report, has sustainability goals. I mean, almost all of them have some kind of carbon or energy reduction goal. So on some level, we won. We got it on the agenda, but we're still not kind of going at the pace. We're going at, far slower pace than what we need, according to the science. So I think companies are going to get there in part because it's just getting clearer and clearer that we can't keep going with the status quo. It's just affecting companies right on their bottom lines, these climate extremes all over the world. They're feeling it. And again, that younger generation, they just are pushing their companies pretty aggressively. And I think that's going to be one of the big things that moves them faster.
I think for the typical consumer, supply chains disruptions are really apparent right now. Are there things that companies who may be watching today, should they be thinking about in terms of making their supply chains more resilient to climate change?
One of the big takeaways from COVID was that our supply chains were not resilient. And it's not just we ran out of toilet paper. It was more that, because there were some very structural reasons for that, that there were different markets for home and for business. But even just the fact that there were disruptions in the kind of medical equipment we needed, and that there were these pockets of places that things were produced that were basically the sole place, because we've chosen efficiency, right? That's part of that shareholder first mentality. We've chosen efficiency over resilience. Resilience means you have some duplication, you have some variety. And so for any business, I think it's about diversity. And that means having potentially multiple suppliers of the same thing, keeping your eye on alternatives to your major supply elements. So if it's an ingredient in a product, are there alternatives? Is there innovation to move away? Innovation to change the business model so there's no packaging. You become more resilient if you're less dependent on any one ingredient in the value chain or any one customer even, or supplier, because any region can get hit with climate extremes and be knocked out for some time. So you have to build in diversity that seems more expensive at first, but actually saves those who do it right a lot of money when something bad happens, and stuff always happens.
The state has committed to some pretty aggressive greenhouse gas reduction goals, and the Park City Wind Project is promising offshore wind here in Connecticut. What do you see as the potential for Connecticut to become a leader?
Yeah, look, we have a lot going for us in theory. Look, we've always been pretty far ahead, in the early regional greenhouse gas initiatives, aggressive, funding of clean economy, public-private partnerships. And we've been pretty far ahead. I think California is kind of always first in many ways. And we've been there kind of legally and all the action against federal law that's taking us in the wrong direction. And look, I think this might be true. I think that Connecticut has the highest educated population, if not then one of the most. And we also, frankly, have wealth, and we are a well-off community. I know there's budget concerns and we are in a recession, but in the broader sense, we do have the capacity to invest. And I think we can also do this in a just way. The just transition is a big topic right now. We have some amazing, not amazing, but amazingly large inequality pockets, where the wealth gap from bottom to top is enormous in regions in this state. So I think we should be heading towards and using the new technologies and any investments in the clean tech. We can use that to help bring up the lower income communities and make sure like lower income housing has solar, people have access to the technologies that make their homes more efficient, their apartments more efficient, that we can use this as a way to also kind of bridge the gap and make the whole community greener, cleaner, and more just.
Great. Is there anything you want to talk about or tell us about your new book coming out?
Yeah, so it's, I have a new book. It won't be out for a while. I'm still finishing the writing, and then publishing is a long process. So it'll probably be out next late summer, like September. So it's a little ways. I'm co-authoring it with Paul Pullman, who was the CEO of Unilever and really led the transition and really one of the first big public company to attempt to make sustainability, core to the business. It's been incredibly fascinating. There's a lot I could talk about. I think, I've said some of the things in this conversation that have come out of this work about the level of collaboration we need and the scale of change that we need. There's a lot in working with Paul that's been interesting about kind of the personal side about, we lay out, kind of 8 or 9 elements of a business that's in service of society. It's net positive, which is the working title. And there's kind of the starting place is actually, you as a person, like, do you care about what's going on in the world? Do you care that there's, 3 billion people without sanitation, that we have this incredible gap, that the climate is collapsing? And it's about finding your own purpose and sense of duty, and with also a sense of humility, and finding, the courage to lead, to take the business in a new direction, and not just go the way shareholder maximization has gone forever. So that's just a teaser of like the starting point. But then the book will move through the kinds of things we need, which is really deep collaborations, systems change collaborations, and address the issues that nobody wants to talk about in business that companies really do need to take a look at, like taxes. Companies avoid taxes, and then we don't have a tax base for society. There's things that are really uncomfortable, and we have to talk about them because they're all part of the system. So I'm excited for it to come out. We'll have more to say. Maybe I can revisit everybody in a year and when the book's out. So thank you for asking.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.